Good day, everyone, and thanks for joining. My name's Alistair Mitchell. I'm the Commercial Director here at Commtract. Part of my role is keeping in touch with our clients on a day-to-day basis and hearing from them what they like and don't like about our platform. Overwhelmingly, what the feedback that I've been getting lately has been, wow, I wish I knew that you had this expert on your platform earlier. I would have been using them. So we get really good feedback about who the people we've got on our platform. And I think sometimes it can be easy to be lost amongst the 5,000 odd people we've got sitting there that are available for people. So what I thought we'd do is start this webinar series and really highlight some of the outstanding experts that we've got on our platform who are available at the moment. So I'm really pleased today to have Nicole, Simone and John joining us. Nicole, Simone and John are experts in speech writing, communications, particularly internal comms and sustainability, but I'll let them speak more about their expertise in those areas to all of you. After that, we'll go into a short little Q&A session and happy to have a discussion amongst us and with you, all of you who've dialed in. Nicole, if it's all right, we'll start with you. If you just want to give us a quick run about who you are, some of your expertise and some of your favourite projects that you've worked on.
Sure. So hello, I'm Nicole Thompson Pride. I'm a speechwriter. I have written speeches for 2 prime ministers, as well as CEOs, keynote speakers, and other high-profile government leaders. And I guess, so I've got about 15 years comms experience, and I'm really passionate about good communication, shaping and changing this world. So I went out on my own and left the public service at the beginning of last year because I see an opportunity to really help leaders, across all fields and industries better communicate to progress the complex issues and ideas that we're facing. And it was well timed, I guess, with COVID landing on our doorstep and sweeping the world at pretty much the same time I started my business, because, it really highlights the power of communication, but also the incredible challenges we're up against as communicators and certainly as leaders. That's a little bit about me. I, obviously help leaders write speeches, but I also go in and provide the building blocks of good speech writing and good communication to help empower employees within organisations, better communicate for their leaders.
Nicole, just on your experience, I'm really interested to know the difference you found between working in the public and the private sector. I actually did a webinar earlier in the year about public sector, private sector transitions, and I know a lot of our clients and experts have worked between both. Do you have a preference about which one you like the most? Or, I mean, is a CEO and a prime minister the same sort of person to work for? Are they different? What's your view on the public sector, private sector difference?
It's definitely very, very different writing a speech for a CEO as opposed to writing a speech for a prime minister or even another federal government minister. There's different priorities. The way you structure the speech is very different. Having worked across private, public and not-for-profit, I think the challenges that communicators face are the same. I think the same kind of internal challenges are the same, trying to get your ideas across the line and really advocating from within the organisation. That's been the same kind of wherever I've worked. But it is a different style of communication, not necessarily that it should be. I think the foundations of good communication are the same across cultures, across industries. I do think we get a bit caught up about thinking that this kind of industry or this organisation requires a different style of communication. I actually think the foundation of good communication is, kind of transcends all that.
Yeah, awesome. And how about you, Simone? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, hi, everyone. I have been working in corporate affairs, marketing communications, public relations for about 20 years. And I guess where my specialty in internal comes from, it's probably part of a broader internal external focus, but it's always been a really important part. And I think that's because of some of the companies I've worked for have tended to be in high growth environments or in environments of big change. So I spent 10 years working in various roles for Jetstar, both in Australia and Asia. And that was really through their period of, the birth of the brand and then the growth of the brand, and particularly the growth of the brand in Asia as well. So internal and external had to work hand in hand because you're going through high growth. I've also worked for Mollis Australia, and that was a startup role. So I was establishing the marketing, brand and communications function. So again, in startup roles, internal comms is an integral part of that. I've also spent 4 to 5 years working for AMP during what ended up being quite an interesting and tumultuous transformational period of their history. And again, internal comms probably during that period probably dominated about 60 to 70% of my workload, because of the importance of what was happening in the external environment and how that impacted staff, how that impacted leaders, and the challenges leaders needed to go through to manage that change. So internal comms has always been a really strong part and something I'm really passionate about, particularly executive and leader comms. I'm working with Commtract. I've done 2 contracts and I did them for a period. I was working on both of them in the same week. So on one hand, I was working for a humanitarian agency that piece of work was doing an audit, an internal comms audit, and a strategic recommendation, and then helping them implement that recommendation. And the contract I was working on was with a listed entity who had sort of in recent years developed a group-wide structure, a group kind of function, and really have had to design an internal comm structure around that. So half my week was spent trying to communicate to humanitarian workers, both in Australia and in East Timor and Papua New Guinea. And on my other part of the week was spent focusing on communications to patent attorneys. So, and I really loved that diversity, but to Nicole's point, the structures and the approaches you take are the same. I think what's critical is really understanding your audience and working out what levers you need to pull and push depending on the nature of that audience. And that was completely evident to me when I was managing those 2, because the personalities of those employee groups are so vastly different.
Absolutely. So just out of interest, I mean, you've obviously done both the contractor life for a little bit now, as well as having the full-time role, through much of your career being in full-time corporate roles. Do you have a preference, and what do you sort of see as the pros and the cons between the 2?
The pros, and there are lots of them, what I've really enjoyed is actually being able to bring a really fresh, unbiased perspective into an organisation where you don't know them and you can actually just apply your skills as opposed to your background knowledge. And I think that's actually really fresh for me, and I think it's fresh for the organisation as well. And potentially things get raised that they may not have got raised if you had somebody who was embedded in that business full time. So I really like that perspective. The types of contracts that you get tend to be people who want that perspective and want more of the strategy. And at my part of my career, I really enjoy sort of sharing that strategy, helping with the implementation, but really using my experience to be able to help shape that. And then the third pro is really the variety that it has given me. I spent, the last 5 or 6 years has been in financial services, and the last 10 years was in aviation. And the great thing about Commtract is in 1 week I had humanitarian and patent attorneys, and I actually really loved it. I think it kept me on my toes, and it, I wouldn't have got that diversity had I been in a full-time position. So I think it's got to be the right time of your career and the right stage where I think firstly you want to do it and you can actually add proper value, and that's why I think at the moment I can add proper value, and it's a good time for me personally. So that's why it's worked.
Yeah, fantastic. And just for some of the clients who are on the line, just interested to get your feedback on what makes a good client as a contractor. What makes a good client to work for? If I'm a client and I'm looking at bringing a contractor on board, what are sort of things that you found that clients do best that really make the contractor experience work?
Oh, was that for me?
Yes, yeah.
Oh, sorry. I've always had, look, to be honest, I've had 2 contracts and 2 really good experiences. So, so maybe so I think, so I've been, I don't know any other different way, but I think being really open. One of the contracts I started working on was really only supposed to be short-term in one particular area, and they worked out that I had some skills in the external comm space and have really leveraged those. So I think having an open mind about what can be done and being open to suggestions has really worked. I have a really strong relationship with the humanitarian agency. And again, I think they were really open with me and I was really open with them. And I think that has really helped. And that experience for them was the first time they'd used a contracting service. And so it was, you know, they were asking me about my prior experience. I'm like, I don't know, you're it. But I think just being open, honest, and being really clear about the brief, being clear about if it's not a full-time position, what are the days that you work, when don't you work, when are the areas for flexibility. And I think it's more the mechanics that help it really work well.
And just a reminder to those who are in the audience, if you want to submit a question, please do so now using the Q&A function built into the Zoom. And I'll go to John now to give us an introduction about himself.
Absolutely, and thanks. I'm also one of the ones that have crossed the public-private sector divide. I'll get to that in a sec, so we're not alone. So I have sort of worked all over the world. I started my career in the public space at the United Nations in New York in a couple different capacities there, and then on to AC Nielsen and McKinsey to sort of cut my chops in the private sector. But all of that really with public sector clients, whether that was the UN or McKinsey or Nielsen. I then moved to Shanghai during the global financial crisis, got out of New York and tried to go to a place where things weren't so difficult. And that's when I sort of fell into sustainability. I think at that stage, we weren't even calling it that yet. I know today a lot of people come out of university with master's degrees in sustainability, and that didn't exist 15 years ago. So I sort of wanted to figure out, how do I marry my public sector experience in a city like Shanghai, which is extremely financial and private sector based, and kind of fell into the space. I worked with a group called BSR. They are sort of the McKinsey of the sustainability space. And I was fortunate to work with many large clients, the likes of Walmart, Target, Dell, HP, quite a bit around China and the rest of Southeast Asia, working on worker empowerment programs, a lot around strategy and risk management, and then into materiality and reporting. And I guess just to back up 1 second to be clear, when I'm talking about sustainability and the work that I do, hugging the trees, saving the polar bears, that's great, not really my thing. I work more on broad scale sort of private sector sustainability. So looking at operations, looking at reporting, which is how the comms aspect gets built in. And then a few years ago, I started to realize there's a major gap between sustainability and the way sustainability is communicated. So I did set up my own shop looking at specifically that area of sustainability, so the strategic communication side. I moved to Melbourne about 2 years ago to sort of expand the business here as well, and have been quite fortunate to work with a few clients here in Australia, and then with Commtract, beginning with the NBN currently, looking at their investor relations and ESG work, and really heartened to know that as we're sort of hopefully coming out of the tail end of COVID, there has been a huge uptick from businesses with sustainability.
Yeah, awesome. Do you have Chinese language skills, John?
Do I? That's yes.
That must be that. Do you find that useful in other engagements as well?
It's an interesting thing because then politics start to play into the space, and I tried to get out of that so much. But yeah, it does start to. I think, especially in Australia, I think it's very much English language, which is good. In China, it was sort of a mix. So there a lot. It depended on the business, really.
Fair enough. And yes, actually interesting when you say the point about how, you know, there are people coming out now with specific sustainability sort of qualifications. It's funny when sometimes clients say, I want someone who's a sustainability expert. It's a really senior role, so they've got to have at least 15 years experience in sustainability. And then you say, well, I'm not sure sustainability functions have been around for 15 years, but they're still, at least in most corporates, there really hasn't been that sort of focus that there has been now. I'm interested to know what you think, John, about the drive for a lot of this sustainability. And some people say it's credit, give all the credit to to Larry and BlackRock about driving it through, as major shareholders of a lot of the companies. I think in Australia, it's probably fair to say the government's not really leading it in Australia. So is it customer driven or is it shareholder driven? Do you have a view on what's driving this sort of focus on sustainability in our big corporates at the moment?
Yeah, I like to call myself a pragmatic altruist. So I am still trying to do good and push, building a more sustainable world. But I'm also very pragmatic about how I'm looking at that and how the work that I do. So I think in saying that the ends sort of justify the means. So whether a company is doing it because their board is pushing it or because they know they can it makes financial sense, which is probably why they should be doing it. Or it's coming off of a million other reasons, or maybe they're doing it because they think it's a good PR move, not a smart move, but as long as it gets the conversation going, I'm okay with that. But at the end of the day, it does need to make dollars and cents, and it can't just be about hugging the trees. The environmental side is great, the green side is great, but the narrative within the business, especially when it gets to the senior leaders, it has to help the bottom line, and it does, which is a good thing.
And is that, I guess, is that looking at things more holistic, as in when including the financial benefits of your customers, for example, knowing that you're a sustainable organization rather than, for example, there's things you do like, not giving receipts at ATMs that are obviously going to cut down on your footprint, but that might save you some money as well. But obviously there are some other things that a business might do that does have an immediate sort of cost on the bottom line. But do you measure that against the more intangible benefits for their customers, knowing that they're having a more sustainable reputation?
Yeah, and what that requires, though, are really forward-looking executives that can champion that, because that's sometimes a tough sell to talk about the intangibles versus the quarter-by-quarter results, which is what a lot of executives are measured on.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. We've got our first question come through. Actually, it is for you, John. Rebecca's just asking about whether your work, it sort of just touches on what we were just talking about, whether you're more focused on financial sustainability or environmental sustainability, and how do they overlap?
Yeah, so there are sort of the three big pillars of sustainability: environment, and social, and governance. So they all do sort of overlap. I am not a scientist by any stretch of the imagination, so I don't touch sort of the environmental side. Also, being perfectly transparent, it doesn't really interest me because there's plenty of people already doing that. I do really like the social and the governance side of sustainability. I like working with people, and I hate that I'm about to use this term, but we call it human capital, which is HR. But I also like working on the governance side and making sure executives and boards and operations are all in line. And a lot of that does come down to investors and the financial side of things.
Yeah. Okay. And Nicole, just got an interesting question for you, which is about in your work as a speech writer. How broad does the speech writing function go? And do you do speech training with executives and the people that you've worked with, or is it more just putting the words on a piece of paper and letting them deliver it in their own voice?
Yeah, so this might be surprising, but I have a unique background for a speechwriter, and that's that I come from communications. So, which is actually not that common for speechwriters. Speechwriters kind of come from all walks of life, including like academics, screenplay writers. But I started off in communication, have an undergrad and a postgrad in communication. So before I was a speechwriter, I was a media advisor and a media manager. So yeah, I do have a lot of experience, preparing leaders to actually deliver the communication as well as just write it. And, I think that for me, it's made a big difference. I know there's other successful speechwriters that don't come from communication background, so it's obviously not essential, but it does, I do feel like I have a bit of a whole package to kind of offer, because before I was a speechwriter, I was a media advisor and then kind of transitioned into speechwriting.
Yeah, great. Is that, you may have seen in the Margaret Thatcher movie about how they helped her get her tones right. Does that happen in reality for you? Is it coaching on getting tones right for delivery, or is it more about using the right words?
I haven't gone that far with tones. I guess that's not my kind of area of expertise. Yeah. There's definitely the speed and volume. There's a lot of psychology around, if you sound breathless, or if you're using one word sentences, you can kind of create, like you can get the audience to go, oh, hey, I need to listen to this. This is important. So there are ways you can play with delivery, which is often written into the speech. But if you're not aware that the speechwriter is trying to create this kind of crescendo and build up to that and really pull the audience in, it can be delivered flat. So that's kind of the advice I give. It's more around making sure you're lowering your voice when you need to, and then speaking louder to draw them back in, because I'm sure you can all appreciate when you're listening to a speech, it's easy for the audience to go off and start planning dinner or thinking about the shopping list or something like that. So there are actually techniques to, draw their attention and bring them back in and highlight. I often say when you're watching a movie, if you think of it like that, like Jaws, that dun, 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 dun. And we all know something bad is about to happen. And you can play on that when delivering a speech to kind of go, hey, this is important. And likewise, when we're watching like a romance scene, there's like really elongated music. So that's something that to be aware of, that absolutely the delivery of your like sentence structure and your delivery is signaling to the brain if they should be like listening to this or not. So I'm more in that area as opposed to tones.
Yeah, all right, fantastic. And Simone, a question that's come through for you, which is about the size of internal comms teams. Did you see bigger teams in aviation or financial services? And do you believe that internal comms should be fixed to the companies, as the size of the internal comms team should be fixed to the size of the headcount at the company?
That's a really interesting question, because the reason I say it's interesting is because I've had companies come to me and say, I think we need an internal comms person. And you really need to stop them and go, let's see what kind of internal comms you have and what you need before you actually put a head count in, because some of these organizations can be quite small. And then it goes to, what's the ratio? Is it when you get to 500 people, you have a full-time FTE? What are the resources you have before? So it's a really common question. In terms of, just to start with my experience, when I worked at Jetstar, obviously, it being a budget carrier, we weren't flush with resources. So the internal comms group function was quite small. I think 2 people at the time, and this is back in my day. And our country comms people had to have a blend of both because you couldn't afford to have one internal comms person. And looking back now, I think that's actually quite remarkable, because the complexity of that employee base does mean you have to be very creative with your internal comms. You don't have people sitting in front of computers. You have aircraft engineers, flight attendants, pilots. You have to try a number of different ways to communicate to your staff. So, but you can still manage it on a lean team. You just have to get creative. Financial services tend to have quite large, from my experience, quite large internal comms teams. And they tend to structure, rather than have generalists attach internal comms people to particular leaders and functions. And I think it's because a lot of the big financial services companies in Australia are quite matrixed organisations, and so they actually need comms people to help information flow from top to bottom. And so that was quite a contrast when I went from the airline industry, which was very lean, to financial services, which is highly matrixed and actually required comms people to get the information from top to bottom. I would think if a company was deciding whether they need internal comms first, is actually to do an audit on how your comms is currently working and what tools you're currently working, and the level of competency in both your leadership and your managers. Because I think that's will tell you what style of internal comms person you get, because you can get an internal comms person who can come in and help train your managers and leaders to be better communicators. And my preference is that way. But if you get an internal comms person that you just want to write or do the comms for leaders and managers, that's a different type of internal comms person. So I think you've really got to work out the complexity of your audience and the level of comms capability in your managers and leaders to decide what kind of internal comms person you need.
Yep. That sort of goes into this a follow-up question from someone, which is, do you have a view on whether internal comms should sit in a HR function or a comms function?
This literally comes up every week at the moment. Literally, I'm dealing with it in 2 different organisations this week alone. And one has it sitting in the with a comms function that reports into the executive, and one is putting it into HR. Again, I think it depends on the size of the organisation and where it actually makes sense. My gut will always say that internal comms should actually sit with the function that is feeding into the executive. So whether that's part of the corporate affairs function, that kind of function, because it's wrapped up into so many other areas. It's got to be linked to the strategy and people who are communicating the strategy on a regular basis. And I'm not saying HR don't communicate the strategy on a regular basis, but their focus is slightly different. So my gut always says that, but there are occasions where I've worked with people where it just, for that organisation, makes sense that it sits in with HR. I think the key is you get somebody, though, who is not wedded to solid lines and is very good with dashed reporting lines.
Yeah.
If you get someone who's good with dashed reporting lines, it really doesn't matter. You could have them reporting into IT and it would still work. So, yeah.
Fantastic. I think we've got time for one last question, and it's for Nicole. And it's, can you say what sort of device or technique do you use in the speech to get an audience back on track if you feel you've lost them to the shopping list?
Wow, I wouldn't want to put the shopping list in there in the first place. That is, that is really something that I'm trying to advocate. I think we've lost an appreciation for what good communication is. And, a speech, believe it or not, is never, ever, ever about the person delivering it. And it is always about the audience. And I just can't stress that enough. And I wouldn't put a shopping list in there, because I just think you need to go in and think, what am I trying to achieve? Is it more important that I list every policy that I want to talk about and no one hears it, or that I get one single key message across? So I would advise against the shopping list. But if you have kind of...
So, Nicole, I think the question said if the audience has already dozed off so much that all they're thinking about is their shopping list.
Oh, their shopping list.
Yeah.
So, okay, I'm with you. Sorry. I've written too many policy speeches, which are a shopping list of policies. If you've lost them, look, so we talk about signposting in speeches. And really chunking a speech up and having it in sections. So if you do lose them, there is a point in the speech where you will try to bring them back in. And a statistic, you only ever use a statistic in a speech if it is shocking. If a statistic doesn't shock, don't use it, because it's quite hard to process numbers when you're listening and not looking. So a statistic is a great way to kind of shock people and bring them back in. Definitely raising your voice with if you're using a quote and that gives you the chance to kind of say, hey, stop, you'll trigger that kind of, using those kind of more dramatic techniques that are there for that arousal of getting people, you can't just keep going on with that monotone, long sentences. If you've lost them, you're going to have to use a cue, which is, something that's short, sharp, or shocking. So one of those three S's.
Fantastic. Look, we have come to the end of the session. So I just want to say thank you to the three of you. It's great having you on the platform. Look forward to getting you more work. I know that clients have really enjoyed hearing from you today. And thanks to everyone who dialed in. And we'll leave it there. So have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Cheers.